Welcome to Libyth. Today we're with the Tsurezuregusa and its two most practical arguments. Practical in the sense that they are directly about how to live, what to want, and what constitutes the fundamental error most people make with the time they have. These are not abstract philosophical positions for Kenko. They are conclusions arrived at from experience, from having been inside the world he is now outside, from having watched the error operating in others, and, we can presume, in himself. The argument about solitude begins with a distinction that is easy to miss. Kenko is not arguing for isolation. He is not arguing that human company is worthless or that the world should be avoided. He moves through Kyoto. He attends public ceremonies, visits people, has conversations, observes public gatherings. The Tsurezuregusa itself is written for an audience. He knows who will read it, and the knowing shapes the writing. What he is arguing for is solitude as a base, as the condition from which engagement with the world becomes possible in a different and better way than it is possible from inside the dense social network that most people inhabit. The difference between solitude as base and social embeddedness as base is not about how much time you spend alone. It is about where your attention is organized from. The person fully embedded in a dense social world, with its obligations, its performances, its constant management of other people's expectations and one's own self-presentation, has very little attention available for the actual texture of the world. Not because they are unintelligent or insensitive, because attention is finite, and social life consumes it in specific ways that are difficult to notice from inside. Consider what it actually costs, cognitively, to be continuously present in a social world. You are tracking how you appear, managing the impression you make, monitoring the reactions of others to what you say and do, navigating the subtle hierarchies of status and relationship that shift constantly, preparing responses to what might be said, revising your self-presentation in light of feedback you are receiving in real time. These are not trivial operations. They run continuously in the background of social existence, consuming attentional resources that are genuinely not available for other kinds of attention when they are consumed in this way. The angle of light on a wall, the sound of rain, the quality of a garden at different times of day. These are available to notice when you have stepped back from the consumption of social management. They are not available when you haven't. Kenkō gives us a very specific illustration of this in the essay about watching a public ceremony in Kyoto. He goes to observe one of the great seasonal rituals that structured aristocratic life, drawing large crowds, providing the occasion for the kind of public performance that Heian and post-Heian court culture ran on. And he finds himself at the edge of a crowd where everyone is pressing forward, trying to get a better position, jostling for a view. He observes that the people pressing forward are not actually watching the ceremony. They are managing their position. They have sacrificed the experience they came for to the effort to secure the conditions for the experience, and in doing so have replaced the actual experience with the management of access to it. He steps back from the crowd, finds a position at a distance, and watches from there. He sees the ceremony. They see the backs of the people in front of them, plus whatever glimpse they can seize in the spaces between heads. This is not just a scene from medieval Japan. It is a precise description of what happens to attention when it is organized around position and access, rather than around genuine presence. The person managing their position in the crowd is not doing something stupid. They are doing something entirely rational given the framework they are operating in. The framework in which the value of any experience is measured by how directly and completely you can access it, which means the framework in which the closer you can get, the more you can see, the more of the experience you have obtained. Kenko's objection is not to the rationality of this within its own framework. His objection is to the framework itself, to the assumption that value is a function of access and proximity, that more of the experience is better than less of it, that full visible presence is preferable to partial presence observed from a distance with full attention. The Zuihitsu form is itself the enactment of this alternative. Following the brush, with no particular audience in the room, no argument that must be made, no case that must be won. The form creates the conditions of genuine attention in the act of writing. Argument is a social act. It addresses an opponent and is shaped by the need to persuade, which means it is always partly about the relationship between the arguer and the person being argued with, never purely about the subject itself. The Zuihitsu addresses no one. It addresses the brush, which is a way of saying it addresses the thought itself, the actual movement of perception, rather than the performance of having thoughts for the benefit of an audience. The trust that this kind of attention will produce something worth reading, without knowing in advance what that will be, is only possible from the base of solitude. Only from the position of someone who has stepped back far enough from social performance that they can hear what their own attention is actually doing, independent of what performing attention would look like. There is an essay in which Kenko describes a monk who has achieved genuine mastery, not a specific monk, but a figure built from observation, and notes that the mastery is inseparable from a quality of unhurriedness that can only come from a certain kind of life. The master does not rush, not because he is lazy or indifferent, but because genuine mastery requires the kind of presence that rushing dissolves. The hurrying person is already, in some sense, somewhere else, already in the next moment, the next task, the place they need to be when this is finished. They are executing the present rather than inhabiting it. The master is entirely in the present action, not because he has consciously decided to be present, but because the practice has, over time, reorganized his relationship to time. He is not performing presence. He has it. And that having comes from a life organized to make it possible. A life in which solitude is the base, in which the social noise has been sufficiently reduced that genuine attention can take up the space that noise would otherwise fill. The critique of ambition that follows is Kenko's most sustained and most personally grounded argument. He was a court official. He understood ambition from the inside. He was formed by a culture in which rank mattered enormously, in which the management of one's position within the hierarchy was a primary activity, in which the accumulation of status was the primary metric by which a life was evaluated. He participated in this culture. He was shaped by it. The critique is not from innocence, or from a position of never having wanted what the ambitious man wants. It is from the other side of wanting, from the position of someone who has understood what ambition is actually offering and what it actually costs, which is a different kind of authority than the authority of someone who never wanted. The man who delays is his most recurring figure, and the recurrence is itself telling. He returns to this figure so often that you start to wonder whether it is, among other things, a self-portrait. This is the person who plans to begin the real thing, the real practice, the real relationship, the real attention to the present, when certain conditions are met. when the obligation is discharged, when the situation is less demanding, when things settle, when this phase is complete. The plan is entirely sincere. There is no self-deception about the intention, only about the likelihood of the conditions ever being met. Because the conditions for the real thing, the conditions under which the person intends to finally begin living in the way they have decided is right, require the world to simplify itself as a reward for their patience, and the world does not simplify itself. The obligations multiply. The demands compound. The phase that was supposed to be temporary extends indefinitely, because there is always another phase behind it. And the life that was going to begin when the preparation was complete turns out to have been the preparation, which was also the life, the whole life, consumed in the service of a future that was structurally prevented from arriving. Kenko writes at one point about a specific scenario that has the quality of a scene observed rather than invented. A man who has decided to become seriously engaged in Buddhist practice, who has genuine religious intention, who is aware that time is short and that the practice requires sustained attention, and who nonetheless keeps finding reasons to postpone the beginning. There is a family matter that needs attending. There is a practical problem that requires resolution. There is a social obligation that cannot be declined. And each of these is real. None of them is an invented excuse, but together they constitute a structure that will produce exactly one outcome, which is that the practice never begins. Not because the man is insincere, but because the structure he is living in is incompatible with the beginning he intends. The present is being treated as an obstacle between him and the future in which the real life will start, and what Kenko sees so clearly, and what is invisible from inside the situation, is that the present is not an obstacle. It is the only location where the beginning can happen. It is the only location where anything can happen. The future in which the practice will begin is not a real future that will eventually arrive. It is the current present, which will be replaced by another present, and another, in each of which the beginning will have been deferred to the next one. The collector of things is a related figure who embodies the same error in material form. The accumulation of objects, the building up of a collection of beautiful or significant or valuable things, feels like the acquisition of something. And in one narrow sense it is. You have the objects, they are yours. But Kenko's reversal of this is precise and vertiginous. The objects will outlast the collector. They are indifferent to his investment in them, indifferent to the time, energy, money, and attention he has organized around their acquisition and maintenance. He is temporary, they are not. He spent his life, in a meaningful sense, in service to the objects rather than in service to himself or to anything he genuinely valued. The objects organized his priorities, structured his attention, directed his decisions, all without any reciprocal investment, without awareness of him or care for his well-being, without the slightest acknowledgement of the importance he assigned to them. There is something precisely vertiginous about looking at this clearly. The things that seem to be the rewards of ambition turn out to have been its actual content, the real substance of the life, which was the management of acquisition and the maintenance of accumulation. The warrior who builds a legacy is the grandest version of this structure. The desire for a name that outlasts the life, for institutions, monuments, recorded deeds that persist after the person is gone, is perhaps the most widespread response to the awareness of mortality that human cultures have produced. And Kenko's response to it is not contempt, but something quieter and more unsettling. The patient observation that it doesn't work. The name is remembered for a generation, sometimes for a century, occasionally, in exceptional cases, for longer. And then it becomes a specialist's knowledge, something known by scholars of a particular period, but not part of the living memory of anyone who didn't seek it out. And eventually, it is indistinguishable from the general noise of history, present in archives, but not in anyone's awareness in a way that would have satisfied the person who wanted to be remembered. The institutions built in one's honor outlast the honor. The monuments become the occasion for the question of who they are for. The legacy fades, as everything does, because the world does not hold still long enough for any name to become permanent, because the world that would have remembered has itself been replaced by a different world with different things to remember. What Kenko proposes instead is genuinely harder than ambition, which is often missed when people read the Tsurezuregusa as a gentle pastoral text. Ambition is easy in one important sense. It gives you a direction, a metric, a way of evaluating your progress and your life at any given moment. Are you advancing? Are you accumulating? Are you building something that will last? These questions have answers, and the answers organize the life. The life of attention that Kenko proposes has none of these. There is no metric by which you can evaluate whether you are succeeding, no accumulation that marks progress, no legible achievement that confirms you are on the right track. The standard against which this life is assessed is not external at all. It is the quality of presence in the moment, which is not something that can be compared to other people's quality of presence or measured against a historical record of your own. It is simply whether you are actually here, in the life you are actually living, attending to what is actually present, or whether you are elsewhere, managing the conditions under which the real life will eventually begin. The final connection the essays make, and it is the connection that ties together everything the book has been building, is between the critique of ambition and the aesthetic of impermanence. These are not two separate arguments. They are the same argument approached from different directions. The aesthetic of impermanence says, things are beautiful because they end, and the correct response to this is intensified attention, not the attempt to prevent the ending. The critique of ambition says, the attempt to build permanence, to accumulate things that will last, to create legacies that will persist, to treat the present as preparation for a future that will be the real thing, is the same error from the practical side. It is the refusal to accept that what is actually here is what there is, that the present moment is not the raw material for a future, but the only location of experience, that the quality of attention you bring to what is actually in front of you is the only real wealth available to a finite life. Kenko does not pretend this is comfortable. He does not pretend he has fully achieved it. The essays are full of the pull of the world, the nostalgia, the desire, the aesthetic pleasure that comes from encountering something beautifully made or beautifully observed. He has not escaped wanting. He has understood what wanting can and cannot give, and organized his life around that understanding rather than around the fantasy that the thing's desire points toward will, if obtained, produce the experience that desire promises. That distinction between wanting with understanding and wanting without it is what the entire Tsurezuregusa is trying to make available to the reader, not as a conclusion to be grasped, but as an orientation to be gradually inhabited, through enough specific examples, from enough different angles, that it begins to function not as a belief, but as a way of seeing. which is what the best essays always offer. Not positions, but transformed perception. That's all for today on Libyth. One new book every week. At least we try.